Shabbat Shalom, everyone. As you can see, I'm currently on Miluim in the area of Shiloh, and I wanted to share with you a very short idea for this Parashat Chukat. If we actually have an overlook at the events of our Parasha, we have a lot of things going on in this week's Parasha. Obviously, we start with Para Aduma, Zot Chukat HaTorah, the idea of the red heifer that allows us to purify ourselves from Tum'at Met, from the remnants, the impurity of death, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the parasha has a lot of other things that are going on in it, in this Parashat Chukat. Just after we have the Para Aduma, we have the death of Miriam. When Miriam dies, the water, the well of Miriam dries up. The Jewish people need water. They complain, and Moshe and Aaron go out there, and as we well know the story, instead of speaking to the rock, they hit the rock, and they are told that they are no longer going to be able to go into the land of Israel to lead the Jewish people. So the Jewish people loses not only Miriam, but it loses potentially Moshe and Aaron. And as we go forward, they try and go into the land of Israel through the land of Edom, and they are turned back, and Edom says, no thank you, I do not want you coming through, our borders are closed, no refugees, sorry. And the Jewish people are turned back, foiled. Our brother Esav is not letting us through. After that, Aaron dies, Hor Hahar. He dies on Hor Hahar, and immediately after Aaron passes away, the Jewish people are attacked by Melech Arad. The Canaanim attack them, so not only are they not in the land of Israel, their leadership is dropping like flies, and they are under attack. Unsurprisingly, this leads the Jewish people to complain, to in many ways rebel, and they are attacked by snakes. And we have the famous story of the bronze copper snake on the staff that saves the people from being destroyed. So if we think about it, this is the parasha that everything goes wrong. Everything is such, as they say in Yiddish, nachs. It's nothing's going right. Everything is collapsing. There's so much to complain about. They're constantly complaining throughout the parasha. Everyone is dying. The parasha starts with death, ends with death. What's going on? And yet, the end of the parasha gives us a very interesting insight into what else was going on at the time. After the Jewish people were turned back from Edom, they tried another route into the land of Israel. That is the route from the east bank of the Jordan River. The area that is now the Golan and down, slightly lower down, today modern Jordan. And they come through the land of Sichon and Og. And they try and pass through peacefully, they're repulsed, and so they have to come in with force, and they destroy Sichon and Og in an amazing battle, which kind of gets a bit underrepresented in the Torah, and they capture this whole area. They have conquered half the land of Israel. The whole area of Ever HaYarden, which will become the place of the three tribes, Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. We forget sometimes, especially when we read the news, when we go through the list of all the bulletins, who died, what politics were going on, who lost, which elections were going on at the time, the leadership crises. He didn't speak at the rock, he hit the rock. Is he suitable to be a leader? Is he not suitable to be a leader? All of these things fill our feeds and our news cycles. But we sometimes forget the Jewish people in this parasha, with everything that was going wrong, also had one of the biggest successes since they left Egypt. They conquered half the land of Israel. Indeed, some people say Moshe Rabbeinu did come into the land of Israel, just not the west part, but the east part. He was able to conquer a land of Israel that survived in Jewish memory, that the Jewish people lived in for decades, for centuries, for millennia. This is part of Kibush Eretz Yisrael. This is part of the mitzvah. This is part of the Jewish future, setting down roots, actually starting the conquest and the entrance into the land of Israel. So we sometimes have to take our heads out of our feeds, of our screens, and look around and remember, hey, Baruch Hashem, we're doing really well. We're conquering the land of Israel. We're settling the land of Israel. The Jewish future is looking bright. Baruch Hashem. The Jewish future is looking amazing. And yes, there is a lot to talk about. But even in that death and bad news cycle are little hints of really positive things. And I want to share a very short idea that I heard from my teacher, Rav Yoel bin Nun. He says, why is Para Aduma, all the halachot, all the laws of this red heifer and the tumah and the tahara, the purity and impurity, why is that in our parasha in the middle of Sefer Bamidbar? That belongs in Vayikra. It makes much more sense to put Para Aduma with Tazria Matzorah, with Acharimot, Kedoshim, all of the different stories of the Korbanot. Why is it in the middle of Parashat Chukat? And he says a beautiful thing. He says that the Para Aduma is a Korban, indeed. But more than that, it represents the overcoming of death. The death is not final. There is a tahara for Tum'at Met. There is a life after death. There is a Mayim Chayim. There is a rejuvenation. The ashes, like the phoenix, we rise from those ashes. And there is life after death. And that is the story of the Jewish people at this stage. The Jewish people have just come through Chet HaMeraglim, and there's a whole question now, the 40 years over, has the 40 years been? But either way, we're now starting to prepare for the next stage. We're starting to prepare for the land of Israel. We're no longer, in many ways, it's the beginning of phase 2 of Jewish history. We're no longer Yetziat Mitzrayim, we're now Knisat Eretz Yisrael. And for that, the Para Aduma is the crux, is the death of the previous generation and the birth of the new generation that will conquer the land. And yes, there will be bad things in the news, and yes, there'll be tragedies, and there'll be deaths, and there'll be wars, and there'll be defeats, and there'll be crises and tragedies, and yet there's also life. There's also rebuilding. There's also Kibush Eretz Yisrael, Hitnachalut, building the future of the Jewish people. So I invite us all this week, Bezrat Hashem, as we go through the news cycles that is constantly, pinging our phones, remind ourselves, let's remember that with all of the bad things, with all of the bad news, there's always good news. It doesn't always get reported. Sometimes it does get reported. We have to read between the lines. And remember that Baruch Hashem, we're doing really well. Shabbat Shalom.